I want to continue talking about this first pillar of a happy marriage by sharing a personal story about a backpacking trip with a group of scouts. 4 adults and about 15 boys met at a park at around 4:30 a.m. one morning, and before long we were on the road toward the flat-top mountains in western Colorado. It was a fairly long drive, and we didn't arrive at our trailhead until 11:30 a.m. So we had a quick lunch, and then we started up the trail towards a mountain lake, some 7 miles away. It was a long and pretty hard climb. We finally arrived at the lake about 4:30 p.m. and began to set up camp. Well, I looked around and I noticed that there was smoke moving into the little valley from over a ridge some miles to the south. And Colorado had been going through forest fires that summer, so I wasn't terribly surprised. My son and I finished setting up our tent and then moved our equipment inside and got organized. When we came out of the tent, the smoke was heavier and it was actually raining ash in my hand. Now I was concerned, unable to judge the distance of the fire, but one thing I did know, the wind was blowing in our direction. Well, it wasn't much later when I was kneeling at a stream refilling my water bottles, and I could hear the boys shouting to me, and when I looked in the direction they were pointing, I saw that the fire had exploded. Although I still couldn't see flames, I could see the glow of the flames off of a big plume of smoke. I hustled back to camp, and we gathered all the leaders together to talk about what to do. Do we stay and see what happens by morning? Or do we hike out another trail going a different direction from the winds? Or do we hike the 7 miles back out to our cars? Well, after a robust discussion, we decided to opt for safety and hike out the way we had come. The problem was it was now getting late, nearly 6 p.m. by this time. We knew that we couldn't make it out before dark, and besides that, a number of the boys and the men were already so sore from the strain of carrying heavy backpacks the 7 miles up to the lake. Some had blisters on their feet, and really nobody was looking forward to another long hike. But we had decided that we needed to go. Given the lateness of the hour and the tiredness of the crew, we decided not to gather all of our big gear. So we took day packs, water, snacks, and jackets so that we could get out as quickly as possible. Well, at first the boys were excited, but after an hour or so, things got quiet, and I knew it was going to take all of our emotional reserves to make it back. Our hope was to get as far as possible before it was totally dark. We made pretty good time, much better than on the way in, and finally arrived back at our cars around 9:30 p.m., probably an hour and a half after dark. Now we were faced with another decision. Do we stay the night at the trailhead without sleeping bags, drive to a hotel, or head for home? We ended up driving the many miles back home, arriving at 2:30 a.m. One of the men stopped by a ranch house to call his wife and inform her of our plan and ask her to call the families of all the boys and adult leaders to let them know that we would be home later that night. And this was obviously in the days before regular cell phone use. The closer we got to home, the more I thought about my wife, Judy. She had to be mindful of the ordeal that we'd been through and must have been concerned about us driving home so late. I was sure she'd be awake to greet me as soon as I pulled into the garage. But no, the house was dark. My son jumped out and ran into the house while I arranged a little bit of our gear, put it on a shelf. And then I headed toward the door, sure that Judy would have heard our son come in and come to welcome me with a big hug and tell me how glad she was that we'd made it safely. I opened the door. Darkness. I made my way up the stairs to our bedroom and peered in. Although dark, I could see there was Judy in bed. Well, I limped into the room with blistered feet, exhausted, and sat down on a couch. She didn't stir, so I turned on a lamp. Brimming with feelings and hoping to be able to share some of my experience, I said, "Judy, we're home." "I know," she answered. "John let me know, but I'm really tired. Can we talk tomorrow?" Well, I'd hoped for a little connection and to share a little bit about the events of an exhausting day. Instead, I turned off the lamp and sat in the dark for a few minutes, brooding about Judy's indifference. I finally roused myself enough to take a quick shower, and as quietly as possible, so I wouldn't disturb Judy, I climbed into bed, staying about as close to my edge of the bed and feeling unimportant and resentful that my wife couldn't be a little bit more supportive. Well, early the next morning, I could hear Judy outside talking to a friend, complaining that we'd come home early and left all of our gear on the mountain. "What? Those wimpy men?" her friend said. "Yeah, can you believe those men?" was my wife's reply. Well, I want to finish my story in the next video. But as an aside, I also want to say people always want to know when I share this story, what happened to the gear that we left on the mountain. A nearby rancher was kind enough to take some pack horses up the trail to gather and bring the gear down. One of our leaders drove to his ranch and brought it home.